Hey everybody, my name is Paul Esden Jr., aka Boy Green. Welcome back to my YouTube channel, youtube.com/BoyGreen25. We're back here for another Mock Draft Monday. This is a guest we had on a bunch of months ago. And now we've hit it big time because he's live from the MGM Bet Studios there in New York. So let's bring him in. Ethan Greenberg, team reporter for the New York Jets. Ethan, what's happening, man?
Not much, Paul. Just, excited that the draft is now around the corner. It's one of those things where it feels like it's really close, but also feels like it is very far away at the same time.
By the way, the studio looks fantastic. Mwah, chef's kiss behind you. So a great shout out to the great people that were able to put that studio together. That looks great.
Well, thank you. Yeah, we appreciate it. We've trying to emanate a lot of content out of here, and hopefully, as things get back to normal, we'll all get back to being in the studio. I'm sick of the home studio, Paul. It's nice for flexibility, but as a secondary, not the primary. It's like the alternative option here. I like being. This is the home. This is really our home. So I like being in this home studio.
Well, last week I saw you had some content coming out of there, Ethan. So I guess let's start there. That was the news that came down the pike that Sam Darnold is now a Carolina Panther, and I saw you guys breaking it down. You had Olivia Landis, of course, EA, Eric Allen. You guys are kind of breaking down the details. So I got to ask you your thoughts, your opinions as a guy that's been behind the scenes, interviewed Sam Darnold. You've seen him up close and personal. When that news came down the pike that Sam Darnold was no longer a member of this team, what was the emotions there for you?
Well, I think, I'm first say this, like Sam and all my interactions with him has been a very great person. I don't think anybody would really say a bad thing about Sam. He's just an all-around good guy. Joe Douglas, you heard in his press conference, was talking about the type of character that Sam Darnold has. But, I think Joe Douglas said it. This was the move that was not only best for the Jets short-term and long-term, and the best move short-term and long-term for Sam Darnold. I think that, if you were to look at this from a macro level, is it sad that the number 3 overall pick from 2018 is no longer on the roster and is now trying to start his career elsewhere? Yeah, it's sad, but at the same time, it was the right move, I believe, in Joe Douglas's eyes, where you had this unique set of circumstances. You had the number 2 overall pick. You never hope that you pick in the top 2 ever again, as long as Joe Douglas is GM and that he owns that pick, right? Like, let's just say, in theory, if he were to acquire a pick, then that team got the number 2 overall pick. That's not reflective of the Jets record. So in theory, in the best possible scenario, you never want to be picking in the top 3. Charles Davis said to Olivia Landis, it's a lousy, that was the word he used, it's a lousy spot to be in because it means your team record isn't very good, but also it gives you the opportunity, this is what the NFL draft is all about, to flip the script. And now that the Jets have not only 10 picks this year, 11 picks next year, 4 in the first 2 rounds, you can really start to see Joe Douglas trying to build this roster through the draft, which is what he's always wanted to do. When Jamal Adams was traded, he got a number of draft picks. Now he adds to that with the Sam Darnold trade. And, the other thing that Joe Douglas talked about, and he'll, I believe, talk to the media again before the draft, is resetting the quarterback financial clock. And he didn't say he was going to take a quarterback, but he said, it's a fair assessment to believe that they're zeroing in at that position, not necessarily a certain player. So now the Jets have this year 5 picks in the first 3 rounds, in the first 86 to be exact. And then you get, in theory, to reset this quarterback franchise or the financial aspect of it. And then you can start to address different needs and whatever. So I think that all in all, when you look at it in a vacuum, it was a good move by, for Sam, and a good move by the Jets. But when you look at the landscape of what's transpired over the past couple of years, obviously the sense of frustration is there as a Jets fan, and I understand that.
And Ethan, this feels like a Madden video game. You just said the Jets have 21 picks over the next 2 years. I'm like, 21 picks? Like, for just as an example, someone tweeted this out the other day. The Seahawks have 3 picks in one class. The Jets have 21. That's 7. Again, I didn't know math was going to be a part of this interview, but that is 7 times as many as Seattle has this year. And I know that's over 2 years, but that's kind of wild, the kind of assets he has. And I just want to drop this nugget on you. I'm not even sure if you know this. Rich Cimini dropped this on Sunday, that the trades of Leonard Williams, Jamal Adams, and Sam Darnold combined, the draft value chart basically has those numbers around 2,500 draft points. The typical draft for a single team, run of the mill, is 1,700, which means you traded those three players basically for an entire draft class and some. I mean, Joe Douglas is the most powerful man in the entire NFL right now with that.
So I did see that. And I will say that the next step in this, and Joe Douglas will say the same things, is turning those picks into good NFL players. And that is the next step in this evolution. The blueprint is there. You mentioned the 21 draft picks over the next two drafts. Joe Douglas he has the ammunition where if there's a player that the brass likes, he goes up and gets them. If you want to trade back a little bit, accumulate more picks, the Jets have plenty of them, but you have the ammunition where you could not only trade up if you wanted to in round one, but later in the draft as well. The Jets have 2 5th-round picks this year because of the Leonard Williams trade. They have 2 3rds and 2 1sts because of the Jamal Adams trade. So now it's just a question of execution. And we'll see, we've only had one Joe Douglas draft. It feels like he's been a part of this team for a lot longer than that. But he was hired June after the 2019 draft. So now we've had one draft. We've seen what types of players Joe Douglas likes. We know that the core of his belief starts up front, both offensively and defensively. We saw him address the offensive line through the draft last year, Mekhi Becton. And then even later on, and we'll see what he has to offer in this year, was Cameron Clark, kind of had a redshirt year in 2020. And we'll see what happens, right? And then defensively, you think about Quinnen Williams, who was there or part of this team before Joe Douglas. Then you think about free agency. Sheldon Rankins. John Franklin Myers was a waiver claim, actually, of Joe Douglas's in 2019. Vinny Curry. Carl Lawson. I mean, now you're starting to see the foundation of what Joe Douglas wants to build. Now these next two drafts are going to be really where I think you make your hay, because you have the capital to do what you want. Now, we'll see what happens in a couple of weeks, but I think there is reason for Jets fans to be excited.
Ethan, you mentioned the fact that Joe Douglas has a very small sample size, only one draft to his name. Again, he was hired post-draft and post-free agency of everything that happened a couple years ago. How much stock should we put into what we saw in year one, whether it's from the types of players Joe Douglas wants, and also the other thing is trades? Douglas made a few trades in that draft, including moving back initially from their second-round pick. They still ended up with Denzel Mims and a bunch of other picks from all the movement they were able to do. How much stock should Jet fans put into all the movement and the types of players Joe Douglas got in last year's draft to what potentially could be a sneak peek of what they could get in this one?
I think it's a great question. And I will say that, I'm personally, I would like buyer beware. Like I would say that because there's a different set of circumstances. Last year, the Jets didn't have the picks in which we just discussed. Jamal Adams was still a part of the team, so they didn't have the extra one in each of the next 2 years. They didn't have the extra 3. And so I think that with that being said, are the beliefs the same? Does Joe Douglas still believe in the offensive line and the defensive line and winning from the inside out and wanting to add explosive playmakers like Denzel Mims? Yeah, I would say that's a safe bet. But, I mean, a couple of things. I mean, I'd say one, you got to see how the board shakes out. Every draft is unique in that way. 2, with the new coaching systems and the schemes on both sides of the ball, you don't really know what types of players Mike LaFleur and or Jeff Ulbrich will want to have in their system. So, that's one of the things that I'm most curious about, right? Like when I see certain players, I'm like, oh, I wonder if that's a Mike LaFleur type guy, because a lot of people will think, well, it's a San Francisco tree. Mike LaFleur has been with Kyle Shanahan since their days in Cleveland, then Atlanta, then San Francisco. But also his brother, Matt LaFleur, runs it a little bit differently in Green Bay. So is it, what's it more similar towards? Like, I'll give you a great example. A lot of people have in the mock draft circuits have the Jets selecting Travis Etienne out of Clemson at 23 or a running back at either 23 or 34. I saw one today. I think it was CBS Sports. They had Javonte Williams at 34. So a lot of people would say, well, San Francisco hasn't drafted a running back since 2017 when John Lynch was first hired by the 49ers. They've had the committee approach. Raheem Mostert, Jeff Wilson Jr., Matt Breida a couple of years ago, Tevin Coleman, obviously a part of that. And then you think about what Green Bay was running. Aaron Jones and Jamal Williams, more of your, Aaron Jones is the guy. Jamal Williams still gets some more playing time. Then they draft A.J. Dillon last year. I have no idea what it's going to be like, but that's a clear, systematic, different approach between the two guys, one being Mike LaFleur's brother, one being Mike LaFleur's, I'm going to assume that Kyle Shanahan was a mentor to him. So that right there is just, a small little snippet of something to pay attention to. And I think that right there is the wild card in all of this, because let's say Joe Douglas really likes, player X. Well, maybe player Y is a better fit for what they want to run. I think that's really where the wild card is. So that's the long answer. The short answer is I think you can take some stock, but not a ton.
Again, we're speaking with Ethan Greenberg, New York Jets team reporter here. And again, to me, that is also the fascinating part because there's a lot of speculation. All these systems could be different. Mike LaFleur may want a different spin with the Jets, which could be very interesting. And you mentioned the process. And the interesting thing about the process this year is it's different. First off, you're in the studio there live. So that's one thing different. And also, from what we've heard, again, anything can change with COVID, but it seems like Joe Douglas and the staff will be able to be together for the draft. They won't have to be from their own home studio, so to speak. So first off on that, how big of a difference is that going to make? And number two, I want to really dive into the no combine, pro day, how all that affects it. We'll get into that in a second. But first off, everyone kind of be able to have a little sense of normalcy, it seems, for this year's draft.
Right. So that's a great point. We broke this down a little bit with on our podcast that's coming up. So with that being said, there will be a contingency inside the Jets facility. And what that makes it easier is just in sense of communication, right? It's easier to talk to the person to your left or to your right in real time, as opposed to a virtual space or, typing out what you're thinking. So I think from that aspect, it makes things a little more fluid. Now, I do think that the Jets, I think that there will be a virtual aspect of it because there's only a contingency, a small contingency, and there's different blueprints. You could either have 10 people all vaccinated or 20 people and socially distanced. So that might be, don't quote me on that. I might have misspoke there, slightly, but there are two types of contingencies. And, let's say in a typical year, if it's 20 people in the room, there'd probably be more than that or more, right outside the room waiting to, come in or, be viewers, whatever. So I think that it makes the process easier, but I don't think it's necessarily going to be all in person. There's still a virtual component to it and still different challenges and hurdles that you'll have to clear. But I do think that, if you were to ask someone that was, would you prefer to be in the war room with 20 people that you've been working with through the pre-draft process, or would you rather all be in your homes and be, on Microsoft Teams? I think everyone would almost say, actually, I think everyone would say, I'd prefer to be with 20 people in the war room.
Yeah, 1,000%. Again, Ethan Greenberg here with us. And the other side of that is Charles Davis, who joined me a couple weeks ago on a Mock Draft Monday and kind of gave us the NFL Network no combine perspective and what that means. Well, we didn't get a combine, but we did get pro days, and that's something we really didn't have last year. So it's an interesting flip of the script. I know you guys on a recent Jets podcast talked to some of the scouts and kind of talked about their perspectives with all of this. First off, how much more are we taking pro days this year than we have in years past? Because everyone, of course, saw the Zach Wilson rolling out to the left throw that wowed and shocked everybody on social media, and it seemed to make a significant difference in this draft process, how all these pro days are evaluated.
Well, I think what you just said is the perception from like the media side. But when we spoke to the scouts, I'm glad you mentioned that. Dom Green, a national scout for the Jets, mentioned this, and I found it to be very interesting. He was saying that at the combine, everything is the same. It's indoors. Everyone has the same set of conditions. It's a sterile environment. It's clocked by the same people electronically, and they have the same set of rules. So like on a broad jump, you're not allowed to brace, right? You're not allowed to brace your fall. Maybe at certain pro days you are, because they want, players to, in theory, test better if they can brace a little bit. So now not only are you reliant on pro day numbers heavily because the combine didn't exist this year in typical fashion, but not only that, then you're dealing with different conditions. Like what if one guy ran his 40 outside in the rain, somebody ran it inside in a dome? I mean, those are like we're talking about slight differences here, but still a difference nonetheless, something that should be noted. So I think that's what's fascinating. And, I think a lot of people will, a lot of like to use your Zach Wilson analogy, even Justin Fields and Trey Lance, people will get wowed by what you can do in a shorts and a t-shirt. Well, same thing with Josh Allen in 2018 at Wyoming. He did it at the combine and then his pro day. But what the combine, the biggest part of the combine that didn't exist this year, comes off the field, comes with the interviews. All the interviews took place this year outside of the Senior Bowl, just like we're doing this right now through a screen. So you don't get to have the player next to you. You don't get to see the player up close and personal. I think that's another thing. I mean, weighing in at the combine, not only do you get official height and weight, you also see body structure, and you can, different teams might value different things, whatever that case may be. So you don't get that, and you don't get the interviews. Those are the two biggest, I think, two of the, maybe not the two biggest, but two of the biggest benefits of the combine, that now you're relying on pro days and Zoom. So it's a little bit of a different experience. So therefore, pro days mean a little more than years past.
All right, Ethan, you know what's coming. This is a question I ask you every year, and this is a thing that obviously you prepare for like nothing else. Okay, the Jets are almost second nature this year. Like, guys, stop. I've got to worry about this. Boy Green asked me this every year, and I asked you a couple months ago, right after the Senior Bowl, right around the Senior Bowl, hey, who's your guy? You're like, it's still early in the process, man. Got to dig in. I'm like, hey, I respect that. You're a professional. But now a couple months later, we're literally within 3 weeks of the NFL draft. Everyone is bracing themselves. They're on the edge of their seats for the Ethan Greenberg guy, the guy that on draft day, when Jet fans are watching a draft and that guy gets drafted, they're like, even if it's not even to the Jets, just the guy, like, oh, that's the Ethan Greenberg guy. Did you heard that on the YouTube interview, right? That's him. Everyone's been waiting for this, Ethan. So I've laid it out there. Yeah. Who is the Ethan Greenberg guy? You've talked to Dane Brugler. It's been a fantastic series on the Jets. He just released The Beast. I'm sure a lot of people have been digging in on that from The Athletic, of all those guys you've been talking about. You've talked about a lot of guys over this process. Who are the guys that stand out to you? Who are Ethan Greenberg guys?
That's a great question. And, of course, I had to do such a good job my first year by accident by saying Devin White that you had to repeat the question. So, yeah. Anyway, I truth be told, I have thought about this, and I think I'm going to go with offensive linemen.
Oh, Hog Molly. Okay. I'm all about it.
There are two guys that I think will just be good pros. Rashawn Slater out of Northwestern. I mean, talking with Dane, he just sounds like a technician, a guy that can give you multiple position versatility. And he played left tackle in college, a little bit of right, I believe, before that. But some NFL teams view him as a guard. And, to me, I think that he's it sounds like a good player, right? The other guy who actually could be on the board when the Jets are on the clock, Creed Humphrey out of Oklahoma. I mean, this guy, to me, you see his resume at Oklahoma, a decorated player, a wrestling background. His best ability, availability, a lot of people say that, so you didn't really miss time. Landon Dickerson gets a lot of pub, but Landon Dickerson has injury concern in the past. Creed Humphrey does not have that. At the Senior Bowl, played guard and center. So we'll see what his future holds in terms of NFL position. But those two guys stand out to me. I mean, as just guys that I think will be good NFL players, whether they're drafted by the Jets or not.
I love that we're mixing up the positions here. We're not sticking to any one thing. You're a versatile guy, Ethan. And I don't know if you saw this, but Creed Humphrey says one of the guys he loves watching on tape is, of course, the legend himself, Nick Mangold,
I did see that.
Ring of Honor member. So, that obviously helps the case, huh?
A little bit, yeah. And, I just think there's something about, well, first of all, Creed Humphrey, fantastic name, right? I mean, there's something about that and the way that he played at Oklahoma and, offensive lineman, if you're not at the top of a draft, like you probably don't want to know, like to me, like on the field on Sundays, I'm kind of all over the place here. So let's rewind here. On Sundays, you don't really want to hear about an offensive lineman, right? Usually it means it's a penalty. So last year, we obviously heard about Mekhi Becton just because of his raw strength and what he can do on the field, even in the pre-draft process, running like a 5.0 flat 40 at the combine. People are like, what is wrong with this guy? Like, this guy's a freak. So if you're not an elite level talent, right, like Creed Humphrey just kind of seems like that guy, a little not under the radar, but in terms of the media attention, a little under the radar, just shows up to work, does his job well, goes home. you wake up and it's 10 years later and he had a great NFL career. To me, Creed Humphrey could be that guy. Is he going to be that guy? I don't know. I'm not the draft analyst, but to me, I'd put a couple chips on there, maybe, if I
A
were a
couple
betting
bet
man.
MGM chips on there. That's very nice. And let me say, Ethan, before we get you out of here, since it is a mock draft Monday, we have to dabble a little bit in the mock draft nature of all of this. And obviously, we don't know what Joe Douglas is going to do. This is purely speculation, purely just throwing some darts out there and see what happens. The Jets have 2 first-round picks. It's tasty. They haven't had 2 first-round picks in a while. I think the last time was the Sheldon Richardson, Dean Milner double dip. So they got 2 first-round picks. That's a lot of ammo. So let's talk about it. They have the 2nd overall pick. A lot of analysts think it's going to be quarterback. There's some talented quarterbacks out there. Zach Wilson, Justin Fields ran that 4.4 40. That wowed a lot of people. Trey Lance is this weird mystery card. And then there's, of course, Mac Jones of Alabama. So with the 2nd overall pick, let's just mock draft a little bit here, Ethan. Are we going quarterback? Which quarterback? Which one tickles your fancy?
So we're definitely going to go quarterback, given that Joe Douglas said it is a fair assessment that the Jets will, go quarterback at number 2. Also, trading Sam Darnold, the Jets now, that position is a need. And being number 2 overall, everyone assumes Trevor Lawrence will be the number 1 overall pick. And, I think all the guys that you listed all have their pros, all have their cons. And the reason why I want to bring that up is because no prospect is perfect, right? The most popular mock draft selection has been Zach Wilson, hands down.
Yeah.
And I get it. But with that being said, Zach Wilson, speaking with Dane Brugler, who was, I believe, the first person to really say this guy could be QB2 come April, and it's shaping up to be like that, at least in the mock draft circuit, right? So I think that the reason why I'm bringing that up is because Dane has voiced his concerns over certain things that he needs to get better at. His size, right? Like, you can't really do anything about the size. But there are certain aspects of his play that not only Zach Wilson has to get better at, same thing with Justin Fields, pro-con, Trey Lance, pro-con, Mac Jones, pro-con. And speaking with Dane and seeing all the mock drafts around the NFL, whether that's NFL.com, ESPN.com, CBS Sports, the list goes on and on.
Sure.
It's hard to not say Zach Wilson, right? It is hard to not say that the BYU quarterback will not be a Jet. So, do I know what's going to happen? Absolutely not. I really don't. But based on the way that everyone speaks of the mock drafts and everything that leads up to this draft, it seems like it's a likely scenario that Zach Wilson might end up a Jet, right? Don't you agree with that? It seems like there are no mock drafts that have Justin Fields or Trey Lance or Mac Jones at 2. It seemingly thinks Lawrence, Wilson, the rest of the draft.
That's what it feels like, 1,000%. And you couldn't help but notice if you watched the Joe Douglas presser last week, is when the Steve Young, Zach Wilson commitment thing came up, you couldn't help but see the smile. Thankfully, we didn't have masks on, so we could see a little smirk from Joe Douglas. It's like, hey, man, he's pretty plugged in over there. There was some funny comments. So, that's what everyone seems to be saying. So, okay, the Jets just got their franchise quarterback. Ethan, you just got the raise of being kind of the GM here of the Jets. You've given them a franchise quarterback. Jet fans rejoice. But now they've got the 23rd overall pick. A little harder to predict, because there's going to be 22 teams in front of them, including themselves at 2nd overall. What about 23? There's so many different directions the Jets can go, which is fascinating for a lot of different reasons. Maybe you plug in your guy, Creed Humphrey, and that makes sense, or maybe a different direction. Ethan, the world is your oyster here at 23rd overall.
The 23rd and 34th picks in the draft are really what interests me because of what we discussed earlier. We don't know what types of players at every position Mike LaFleur wants in his players and Jeff Ulbrich wants in his players. So we don't know, right? So, and with that being said, Dane Brugler said this to me, and I thought this was interesting. Given the way the Jets have addressed free agency, he said he didn't think that any one of their signings would preclude Joe Douglas from taking that same position. Mm-hmm. So, like, for example, obviously the Jets signed Carl Lawson. Does that now mean that Edge is off the table at 23? No, I don't believe that anyone thinks that. And when you have the number 2 overall pick, you got to get better in a lot of areas. So I thought that was an interesting comment. And a lot of this will come to how the board shakes out, right? Like, let's just have some fun here. Caleb Farley, right?
Oh yeah.
Well regarded player, regarded CB2, then gets surgery late in the pre-draft process. Says he's going to be ready for the season by the team, or the doctors say that he's going to be ready by the season. If he's there at 23 or 34, like when do you swing with that? He's relatively young to the position, but maybe the Jets want an upgrade at corner. Well, maybe the Jets just, in this mock draft and a lot of the mock drafts have added their quarterback of the future. And then maybe you just want to surround him with more talent, whether that comes in the backfield, out wide, up front, because you want to do what basically you said you were going to do for Sam Darnold, right? Playmakers and protection. So that's another interesting thing. I just got done recording the wide receivers episode of the draft preview with Dane Brugler. He mentioned Elijah Moore out of Ole Miss. That's an intriguing option. Peter Schrager has Rondale Moore at 23 in his mock draft. Another intriguing option. So a lot of this will depend on who's available. And with that being said, I'm buying myself more time to consider this. But, I could really see the Jets going in a number of different directions, right? I think my gut would say, not my gut, but I guess in this mock draft scenario, if I am the general manager,
right,
the Jets haven't signed a cornerback, I tend to lean maybe a cornerback at 23 or 34. And maybe you fill in, maybe it's not Farley, maybe it's like Greg Newsome out of Northwestern, right? I mean,
yeah.
But would it surprise me if it was any of the guys I just mentioned and even guys that I haven't mentioned? Not even in the slightest. I think there are a lot of different holes to fill still on this roster, whether that's depth and, highly players that immediately contribute in a rotation, or players that would start from day one. Like, I'll give you another example. Linebacker, the Jets have CJ Mosley. They signed Jared Davis. They have Blake Cashman. They have Sharif Finch. I mean, the Jets need to get deeper at linebacker. So at what point in the draft does that become a conversation? I think these are all fascinating questions, and we're going to find out in a couple weeks here.
Yeah, and you mentioned corner, so anytime you mention Caleb Farley, it's hard not to get Bryce Hall vibes from last year. Joe Douglas stealing him last year at a need of corner, so I like the corner talk. And I will say this, Ethan, I am quite surprised as a proud Syracuse alum, there's not another quarterback you may have mentioned potentially at one of those spots. Interesting.
I think a part of that is me being a little scared, because now I'm attached to Syracuse, so if Fatu Melifonwu comes to the Jets, if he were to be drafted by the Jets, now it's like, now he's become attached to me by everyone that I work with just because we attended the same school. And I think we might have overlapped for a year. No, I don't think we did at all.
Oh, I was just about to say, oh, wow. Okay. And the same thing I think happens with EA and all the Gator guys that come in.
Right. So, Melifonwu, I don't know what his first year was. My last year was 2016. So let's see, 17, 18, 19. No, he would have been 2017 and beyond.
Right.
So I missed him by, a semester essentially.
Yeah.
But with that being said, maybe Melifonwu slips a little. Maybe he's 66 overall selection in this mock draft. But, I think that it's going to be fascinating, really, because, you mentioned it. We don't know where the Jets will go, not only positionally, but traits. Like, this year's wide receiver class is so interesting. It's similar to last year. It's got star power. It's got depth. What types of players do the Jets want in this offense? I don't know the answer to that. I don't think we know yet because we haven't seen what type of offense Mike LaFleur wants to run. We can guess it's probably you want some yards after the catch guy like in San Francisco. Debo's a little bit of a versatile player. Brandon Ayuk's got the yak ability. Will the Jets want to mirror that? Maybe. I don't know. So I think this is part of the equation that is just going to be super fascinating to see.
All right, Ethan, if the Jets draft Melifonwu, I'll know that you got in Joe Douglas's ear. You gave him a little whisper, give him a little Syracuse sultry.
Yeah, hey, this guy from Syracuse, don't know if you've heard of him. Pretty good.
That would be amazing if that happens. That's it. I'm going to do a silent fist bump when I'm just watching the draft. If that happens, that'll be it. And Ethan, before we get you out of here real quick, just drop one on us. 34, wherever you want. You went a little corner at 23. You went QB at 2, so you have some nice balance there. You got to love that. A balanced diet is important in 2021. So, okay, 34, where do you go? Because to me, this is the sexiest pick of the draft. I love resetting the board and just sitting back for a day and just reevaluating everything. Then night 2 of the NFL comes, and the Jets are going to be picking near the top of that thing with 34th overall. Give us the pick for one final mock draft pick.
Okay, 34. I'm thinking in this mock draft, you get QB, you get corner. I think you got to go back to the offensive side of the ball. You got to add something to help out your quarterback, right?
Yeah.
And now I'm thinking, is it Creed Humphrey?
Oh, yeah.
But you called it the sexiest pick in the draft. A lot of people find wide receiver to be a sexy pick. So with that being said, because we just spoke about him today on my episode with Dane, which will come out later this week, how about Elijah Moore out of Ole Miss, right? Add some juice there, led the FBS in receptions and receiving yards per game. And, I think Ole Miss got a pretty good track record recently coming out of the SEC. Not saying he's going to be or follow suit there, but I will say that Elijah Moore, I think, is an interesting player. Clearly has areas that he needs to improve, just like any player. But I think that it would be an interesting – you can never have enough depth, right, at any position. And for the Jets to be able to have all the guys we just mentioned in terms of who's on the roster, like Corey Davis, Jamison, Denzel Mims, Keelan Cole, then you get Elijah Moore, I think you're set up pretty well there. So that would be the Ethan Greenberg pick. And it's super timely because Elijah Moore is just on the front of my mind.
Well, beautiful. Great timing. And, man, look at that offense. Sweet baby Jesus. Corey Davis over here. Denzel Mims, Elijah Moore. You've done man, Joe Douglas has got to watch his back after that kind of mock draft. Ethan, you're putting that kind of team together. I mean, sweet Lord have mercy. Whoever is playing quarterback this year for the Jets seems pretty well set up, man.
Well, I do think that whether it's pick 23, pick 34, pick 66, 86, next year, I do think that Joe Douglas, assuming the pick at 2 is a quarterback, will do everything he can to surround that player with talent up front, out wide, in the backfield. And, positions we didn't talk about that I, easily could have said at 34, running back, right? But how does Mike LaFleur value running backs? Interesting point. Don't know. So then there's that. Then after that, another position. Well, hold on a minute. I mean, the offensive line, right?
Of course.
All drafts. But the one thing I'll say about receiver, which I find interesting, is because of the depth in this year's class, maybe I'm not saying the Jets, but there will be teams who have the debate. Do we take one in round 1 or round 2? Or because of the depth, do we wait out or hold out and take one later in round 3 who can still be, a solid rotational player from day 1 and maybe emerge as something more? The player that comes to mind when I think of that kind of blueprint, Gabe Davis, UCF last year. Jets fans know him well. Buffalo Bill wasn't the guy last year, right? They have Diggs, they have Beasley, they have John Brown, they add Gabe Davis. He has, he has what I would consider, or what I think people would consider, like a good rookie year. Mm-hmm. John Brown's not there anymore. Well, maybe he steps into that role as, more of a heavy contributor. Maybe that's the blueprint the Jets might follow. Or you can make the argument on the other side. In theory, a 3rd-round player not as talented as a 2nd-round player. And with a young quarterback, maybe you want the more talented receiver around a quarterback. So, I think that there's 1,000 different ways that this draft can shake out, and that's what's going to make it so interesting. And this time next year, like this conversation probably will be a little different because we'll know what types of players fit into each scheme.
All right. Well, Ethan, I want to thank you for joining us on a Mock Draft Monday. Good luck to you and the entire Jets 360 team and everybody over there for what should be a great NFL draft with 10 picks. We'll see how many more or less that they get depending on movement on the board in just a couple of weeks. Ethan, I always appreciate when we get to chat, man. It's always great to chop it up and talk some ball, man.
Appreciate it, Paul.
All right. See you later, man.